how does like the tryout or undrafted free agent process work in the G League? We have a sense of it in the NBA, but in the G League, is it man, I'd imagine it's all just like who's left top of the list, or what agent do I know and wants to come in? What is filling the camp roster like?
Well, I think that one of the coolest parts of the G League is that technically, like, the door is open for someone to walk in off the street and make a G League team. You can't do that in the NBA, obviously. So yeah, the open tryout is open to anyone. Agents certainly refer guys in, but sometimes people come in who you didn't know anything about. I mean, we had a guy, Colin Doherty, who was a D3 player, Hobart, came from outside of Buffalo, who really made it up through that process all the way to the end of last night. I mean, regrettably, I had to cut him, but he was like a fantastic. It was a cool story. Like, we didn't know much about him. He was one of the best players in the tryout. We brought him training camp. He was a great presence there. It hurt to have to let some of those guys go, but I thought that, like, it is a way to see some names that you hadn't seen in summer league or anywhere else. So ultimately we went with Miles Burns. We picked in the first round of the G League draft, a guy who, a little bit of a diamond in the rough, who had played at NAIA Loyola New Orleans for 4 years before he got 1 year in D1, just like a steals machine who, to me, sometimes when you're hitting the G League draft, you're looking for somebody who maybe has one or two elite skills, and then you hope you can build on the rest of them. And I think for Miles to start out, his baseline was just like two things: played extremely hard all the time that we saw in the film, and the G League, like, that matters. That will actually take you quite far to being someone who puts in crazy effort, and incredible defensive instincts just to kind of pounce on balls, be disruptive, create turnovers. And he's been able to, that has translated in at least what we've seen in scrimmages and things like that. So I think that, there's a role from here. That's why I ultimately kind of won that battle for the last roster spot.
Yeah, you could just say it. He's 6'6". He doesn't really have an established three-point shot, and he defends like crazy, including long arms in passing and driving lanes. He was the most Raptors-y guy on the board, right?
Like, he made a 3 in the open scrimmage last night. So there you go.
There you go. Moving in the right direction. Okay, I want to tee up the season and do some preview stuff, talk about what you see the season looking like, some of the individual players. But I also, before we get there, I wanted to go through your background. So for anyone who doesn't know, you came up through the writing scene. You got a journalism degree from Northwestern, and then, sorry, my cat is shaking the monitor here on me. And then you were SI's primary college basketball and Olympic writer for like 12 or 15 years. Man, can you walk us through a little bit what the process was like and how long it was on your radar to go from, someone in a position similar to mine to someone on the team side?
It was not on my radar, to be honest with you. I think that the way this kind of came about was, I had been in a lot of the same places as NBA people in terms of doing stories on guys, and had done some stories on some key eventual Raptors. Fred VanVleet's story for Sports Illustrated had covered Jonas Valanciunas, in Europe, and Jakob Poeltl at Utah, and some of the guys coming in, and but I hadn't been pushing to work in the NBA. And Masai called me kind of out of the blue in 2017. I just assumed it was to talk players, ahead of the draft. People would do that sometimes, the journalists, and it was not about that. It was actually to ask if I had ever thought about front office work in the NBA, just to basically, help find players and help identify talent in different ways. And I thought I kind of botched the first call. I was sort of caught so off guard that I remember telling my wife, I was like, wow, I didn't expect that to happen, and I didn't think it went that well. I was like, that'll probably not progress. But he was persistent, and I think that, I started warming up to the idea of it, came to Toronto, met the people, and was like, okay, this is something interesting that way. And, ultimately, the jobs aren't the same, but there's aspects of being a Sports Illustrated writer that do overlap with the scouting process in the NBA. One, you're trying to identify stories, good stories, ahead of other people. So it's a competitive environment of it's not from a pure talent perspective, but you do want to hit people that are going to blow up. You want to be like, I did the first James Harden story in Sports Illustrated. I think I did the first small mention of Russell Westbrook, Fred VanVleet, Ben Simmons, all these guys where you're trying to get out in front of it and learn who they are. And so that in some way is talent identification. And then it's sort of understanding the player in a holistic way. And then I kind of had two jobs at Sports Illustrated, which one was doing features for the magazine, and two was kind of leading the online coverage, which I had pushed in a big analytical direction. I kind of helped push Sports Illustrated's preseason rankings from just ranking the teams, from in a human way of putting teams 1 through 351 in order to actually having a projection model that did that and worked with. There's an economist, by the way, Dan Hanner, and we kind of developed like a player-based team projection model. So we've done a lot of work that way on projecting college basketball players. And then I had a power rankings column that was a lot of original analytics. So I felt like I was kind of coming at players in a few different ways and really studying them on multiple levels. And scouting in the NBA is all of that. It's being a live scout and doing the kind of the classic eye test evaluation. And, it's also learning who people are. And it's also understanding like what the data says about them now and maybe what it says about how they could produce in the future. So there was plenty to learn. I felt like part of the cool aspect of this job, and probably one of the few reasons I was willing to leave what I thought was a dream job at Sports Illustrated to jump, is that I would be able to come in and learn from like exceptional people. So it was, to me, it was like, I can work and help you, but I also almost want this advanced graduate degree in how an NBA team runs. And if I'm able to see how that works, like the first few years are going to be, it's going to be like 50% working and 50% learning, and from Masai and Bobby and Dan Tolzman and, even like, so, our scouting group, like Curtis Crawford and Patrick Engelbrecht and Keith Boyarski from the analytics side. And so it was kind of trying to be a sponge. And I feel like if I had skipped some of those steps, like if not that anyone's going to offer me a GM job straight from Sports Illustrated, but if I had, it probably wouldn't have gone well, because there's like an incredible, you think that how an NBA team would run, or that you think you could do it, but there's so many things to learn and so many experiences. And the Raptors one has been varied and helpful in that we've been a championship contender, a champion. We had a team that was, had no draft picks. We had the number 4 pick. So all these experiences, like learning how to handle different drafts and different situations, it kind of like built up to this and made me feel comfortable about doing this now. Whereas like I came in pretty green, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And you laid out some skills there that will obviously translate, the ability to evaluate talent and put it out there, right? Like, it's one thing to sit back and say, well, I knew Fred VanVleet was going to be a thing, but to be able to point back to a piece and be like, look, I invested all this time at a guy for a reason, right? Like I'm still living off being high on Fred at Summer League in 2016. So that's obviously one, the relationships and things like that. You hit on some analytics stuff there, some, working with that side of the SI, and before that CNN SI. How much do you think it's been an asset to you coming from a journalism background? Yeah, there's the storytelling element, but there's also a huge communication element. And when I think of a current NBA front office where, there's analytics, there's scouting, there's the head front office people, there's coaching staff, there's the player side, the agent side, being able to be a little bit of all of those things and kind of be a conduit between the groups. Have you sensed that a little bit, or the Raptors too? Like I know everyone with you guys is pretty versatile anyway, but have you felt that versatility and that communication aspect be an advantage for you in the position?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a pretty data fluent environment, even for the NBA. So I don't want to sell anyone short that way. But look, the aspect, I would say there was a lot of value in having all these years at Sports Illustrated, figuring out how to take analytically bent topics and make them digestible by the public. Like, how do you take this thing that we are noticing about college basketball and turn it into a feature, and turn it into a magazine feature that can be digested by the masses? And so there are things like, you have all this data on the draft. Like, how do you present it in the room? How do you present it, as it pertains to like a specific argument and have it hit? And how do you kind of boil it down to like what matters? Because look, there's reams and reams of, the depth of data available in the NBA, and now even on prospects, is so deep that I think you have to like understand how to pick and choose your moments. And like having a decade of figuring out what to pick out and what was worth covering and what was meaningful versus not meaningful in a public way, where you had to show your work all the time. Like that's how you sharpen yourself. And so I felt good about that part. I mean, that experience had a lot of value as it translated over.
So obviously the Raptors have an entire analytics department, and like you said, they're data fluent. Did you get any feedback from Keith Boyarsky, who kind of heads that up on the Effies? I know you used to use the Effies to kind of boil down some or try to find some under the radar guys year to year.
I think Keith will give me the small sample warnings every once in a while if I get too excited about something. And look, I mean, a lot of times the reality is with prospects, a lot of the samples are super small. And, so you do need to, it can't be your only thing. You need the talent evaluation in some of these settings, like the eye test stuff, it still matters a lot because, if you're just working with 20 games of someone's freshman season or a little bit beyond before that, like in Nike or grassroots settings, like you can't make decisions entirely based on those things. So yes, but has Keith, Keith is working with the highly advanced NBA data and the prospect data hasn't caught up with it yet. So, we'll have arguments over what matters or what doesn't, but he still enjoys coming at the draft from an analytical lens and weighs in that way and cares about it. So I appreciate, I appreciate all of the healthy debates we have about prospects, which continue to go on as they enter the NBA.
Well, maybe once the NBA has figured out this Hawkeye installation at the NBA level, we can get it at the NCAA level. And I know you can't comment on that part, but another story for another time. You mentioned the samples are really small with prospects. The samples are also pretty small in the decisions that you make, right? Where you get 6 Exhibit 10 spots to help build this roster out. And, not all of those are the same, right? A couple of those are true prospecty Exhibit 10s. A couple are, let's give our guys a returning bonus. One is Justice Winslow, who's a case on his own. How do you personally, and you guys as an organization, evaluate the prospect and 905 side of things when the samples are pretty small and hitting on one Fred can make a huge difference. Whereas, there are going to be years where maybe someone doesn't become an NBA guy.
Sure. I mean, I think, right. Right now you have 3 2-ways and 6 Exhibit 10s as the primary tools for building your G League team and your development arm. So I don't think that you have to have one specific philosophy that goes across all of them. I mean, for us, it's but we do want growth oriented players. We do want, some of they are growth stocks to me, essentially. And I think that more of them should be that than others. If you're just investing in flat G League contributors, I don't know if that serves your organization in a huge way versus, so for us, and it doesn't have to be all rookies, right? I mean, someone like Javon Freeman Liberty, who has a 2-way with us, scouting doesn't stop at the draft. Javon was a strong college player coming out of DePaul. I mean, even he would, not that we would base everything on a draft workout, but I think he would even admit that he didn't have one of his best ones when he came in for us. We were interested in him. He stayed kind of in his area in Chicago for his first year, but we continued to scout him and saw, him kind of breaking out this summer. And so it's okay, that breakout's starting to happen here. And if we can bring him in and kind of empower him to have an even bigger role with us, because he was kind of playing, he was often coming out the bench for Windy City's G League team last year, and to kind of bring him up and hopefully be the G League team that he breaks out with and then eventually helps the NBA team, that's something that we're trying to bet on. Marquise Noel was a draft night rookie. So sometimes, you are giving those contracts out on the draft night. Marquise is going to be a big part of, I think what, drives 905, but part of having a good G League team to me is having multiple playmakers. So that's Javon, that's Marquise, and then Ron Harper coming back. Once, if you're going to be a second year 2-way in a team, there's a lot on you in terms of one, to earn that second year, you had to show growth, and Ron did late in the season, I think, with the 905, and not just growth statistically, but growth playing on the ball and playmaking. So kind of having that group of guys who can create is important to me. And Ron is also being challenged to be a big voice and culture setter because he knows what we're about. He, he's a natural leader, has a great voice in the team, but he also, needs to be a dominant G Leaguer this year to help carry the team. And Justice, like you mentioned, I mean, I know we were filling out some questionnaires on media day, and I believe it was asked what position are you if you can define yourself? And I think Justice asked me what he should put down, and I suggested all because I'm a fan of. I've seen him play a million. I've seen him play all over the place. I covered him in college at Duke when 2015 Final Four. I've seen him be a wing there. I've seen him play point in the NBA. We've seen him play front court positions. He decided to put down point guard. So, that's if you're imagining what he's thinking. So he's an extremely versatile piece that we could use all over the G League. And Omari Moore also is another one who was kind of a, analytically strong prospect coming to San Jose State in terms of like on-ball creation, of versatile and kind of like a wing-sized creator who I think is also kind of in that mix. And then, we brought back Daryl Morcell, who was kind of a key, like, I thought, culture piece and a very high-end defender who we want to kind of keep developing his offensive skills in Exhibit 10. And then front court wise, two very like still growing, very Raptors-y prospects in Mo Gay and Makura Maker, who we kind of want to develop that way. And that's it's not going to look like in one of those NBA teams with like a classic center, but some of our Raptors ethos of being a little bit creative that way, and hopefully pushing the pace and using long and versatile big men to make it all work together and be a fun product.
Man, I was talking to Justice earlier today, and we were talking about the 2016 Heat Raptors series. I know you weren't with the Raptors yet, but he like came off the bench as a point guard and then started at center later in that series because of the injuries. So that is, I mean, it all sounds very Raptors-y. Justice was also telling me that in his eyes, Mo Gay was probably the standout of camp, or at least, maybe he just didn't know about him a lot beforehand or something. Is that fair? Did he have a really strong camp?
Mo did. I think that we brought him in for summer league. He had played with the Texas Legends in his first year in the G League. And again, a little bit like, mentioned Freeman Liberty. We've done this with Chris Boucher, where it's a year after the G League. We still kind of see some upside, that was another program, want to kind of bring him into our development program. Mo started showing some flashes in summer league, but I really think, through Los Angeles, through Raptors camp, and then especially in 905 camp, like he stood out. I mean, to me, he's looked great. He's a very good, like, presence. He's a sponge. He's a great like lob collector, floor running, shot blocking big man who's stretching out his game. People love playing. I think guards love playing with him. But people didn't necessarily know who he was. He's another late bloomer, like played, didn't have a lot of high school basketball experience at Staten Island, JUCO guy, Stony Brook, Pittsburgh. There's another draft prospect with a similar name that sometimes people even get him confused with. We watched him at Pitt. We knew about him, but sometimes people will talk to, I'll bring him up and they're like, oh, I thought the Hawks had him, or something like that. And I think that you still have to explain who he is. And I think after this season, I think more and more people will know who Mo Gay is. So
you just went into his backstory a little bit and what he was like in college, and it came up when we were talking about Miles, who you guys drafted and coming through NAIA. I know that was a part of the job for you at SI. It still seems like that's a passion area for you, and maybe that's a necessity in the G League anyway, finding those under the radar guys like a Colin from the D3 or Miles or Moji. Is that a fair read, that you still get pretty excited about the really under the radar ones if you can find them?
Yeah, I probably have an unhealthy capacity for remembering a million names and watching, D2 or other footage and synergy, hoping to find people that way. So, look, Miles wasn't that far under the radar, but it is cool to see like an NAIA, star kind of break through. I mean, he showed a little bit of it at Ole Miss, but I think there's even more there in terms of like his production at lower levels of college basketball was pretty wild. And, I think that he's still kind of got room to grow that way. Look, the G League is like a place where I think you should have an open mind about anything. Like there's been, Jalen Morris, another one who's on this team, who's kind of one of the vets that we brought back. He was somebody who played at Malloy, wasn't well known at all. Got looks in the NBA coming out of, a small school, and I don't think he got probably the proper amount of attention coming in. So yeah, the G League is a place to experiment. It's a place to keep an open mind about talent. And to me, just closing it off to only Division I prospects would probably be doing your team a disservice.